Okay, today we're going to do something fun in front of the little gram scale here that costs me all my money. So we're going to talk about saving weight on your race car. Granted, I'm screwing around with my Factory 5 Cobra, but it could be anything. And we're going to talk about saving weight with alternate means like titanium bolts. Here is going to be my example. So first things first. Here's a little titanium bolt. So if you were to switch a steel bolt for this equivalent little titanium bolt, you could realize, assuming that they were the same head type, same type of material, about 45% of the density is what titanium weighs roughly. So for the sake of this argument, we'll call it half the weight. My scale turned off, unfortunately. So these are 3/4 inch jam nuts. These are the jam nuts that would go, in my case, on the upper control arm sleeves. So they're largely dead weight. They don't do much other than prevent the sleeve from turning. Realistically, they could probably be aluminum and that wouldn't really be a big deal. But this is what I had, so we're going to do a little quick comparison. So if I were to take these two left and two right jam nuts, this would do one upper control arm. They weigh approximately 2.4 ounces or 69 grams. And so I'm going to zero this weight out and switch it for steel. So the savings on these parts, so here's the steel equivalents, is 62 grams or 2.1 or so ounces, okay? So while that might not sound like much, that's the difference, right? It's roughly half, okay? So when you're talking using titanium bolts or titanium hardware or alternate means to save weight, you can kind of factor that the average cost per gram, and an M&M, a chocolate M&M, I don't have one of those here. I wish I did as a prop because I would eat them because they're delicious. But a chocolate regular, not peanut M&M is about 0.9 grams. So for the sake of this argument, let's say a peanut M&M is 1 gram. So for every, or excuse me, not a peanut M&M, a regular M&M is 1 gram. So for every chocolate regular M&M you save, it's going to cost you about 50 cents on average if it's titanium bolts. And I base that on a whole bunch of different size and shape bolts. The bigger the bolts, the better the value. So exchanging a steel 3/4 nut like this for a titanium 3/4 nut like that, these are roughly the same thickness, exchanging those is a better payoff. You generally get a better deal on the larger hardware. So you save more weight and they generally cost less per gram. So they would be lower than that 50% threshold. But just to compare some other things would be like aluminum. Let's say this brake bracket. So this gigantic brake bracket, this goes to a Mustang Cobra brake assembly. There are aluminum versions of this. If you switch this to aluminum, but or I don't know, let's say the top covers on your transmission, for example. If you change those to aluminum, on average, aluminum costs about 15 cents for every gram saved. And I averaged amongst a various number of parts. I didn't take like aluminum engine blocks into account here because they're really expensive and that would hurt the averaging. But you kind of get my drift. If you could replace it with aluminum, you should, because aluminum is cheap and it would be substantially cheaper and it would actually save more total weight, right? It's about 30% or 33 or so percent the weight of steel. So if you were to switch things for aluminum where possible, you should do that. Not titanium. You would only use titanium if you need the corrosion resistance or increased strength over aluminum. And that's a whole nother topic for another day. But let's talk about something like maybe a big ticket item. Let's take a battery. I don't have a battery here to show. I'm sorry. I don't have a battery. But if you were to take a Group 51 car battery, that's what I'm using in my Cobra. I have an Optima yellow top. A Group 51 car battery weighs approximately 26 pounds, and it costs about $279 at today's prices. If you were to replace that with a lithium car battery from somebody like Anti-Gravity Batteries, that's a really expensive battery, $950 battery, and it weighs about 14.3 pounds, give or take. So just imagine that you spent that kind of money, right? That's a substantial amount of money. And it sounds crazy, but that's actually about 10 cents per gram saved. So it's cheaper than replacing like these nuts, theoretically, with aluminum per gram. So, you got to calibrate your thinking. The price of the item isn't necessarily a detractor. Yes, a $900 car battery I still think is pretty crazy, but if you're trying to save the maximum amount of weight, believe it or not, the dollar spent per weight saved, the lithium car battery would be a good way to go. Just since I happen to have it here, this control arm sleeve, this is a front lower control arm sleeve from like a Mustang, or in this case a Factory 5. You could replace this, let's say, with a titanium tube. Let's just go ahead and say we're going to do that, of the same type of material, or wall thickness and length. And this actually would save you a lot more per dollar, right? This would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 52 cents, or excuse me, 25 cents to 22 cents per gram instead of 50 cents per gram, because titanium tubing isn't actually all that expensive in the grand scheme of things, and this part isn't very technical, where something like a bolt is a lot harder to make, right? And this is a aerospace bolt, so you certainly would not want to use this. This is like a $68 bolt, okay? These are 5/16, but they're all fine thread, okay? They're all going to be fine pitch. None of these NAS mil-spec bolts are going to be coarse thread. That doesn't even exist. So if you were to take something like a Tremec TKO, these are 5/16 by 1. There are 20 of these bolts in that transmission. But you wouldn't save much weight by doing that, right? It's just honestly not worth it. You know, it might feel good to say, hey, I saved some weight. It doesn't add up to enough. Even 20 of these don't do much. And in fact, you couldn't even use this bolt if you had them, if they were free, right? If you didn't pay for them, because they're fine thread, which won't screw into the transmission, and they're not threaded full length. So in the case of this, they couldn't be used as a cover bolt because it wouldn't work. It'd bottom out. And all of the NAS bolts are not going to be full thread. That's just not how it works. So they're going to have a grip length, and they're going to have kind of a constant amount of thread, kind of no matter how long they are. So if this bolt was 4 inches long, which I'm not even sure if they make, but maybe they do, it would have a similar amount of thread on it. Okay, so that's not going to be a good alternative. So certainly don't buy stuff like this mil-spec bolt, right? That's a bad idea. Look at alternate means to use aluminum where possible. And then when you're buying a titanium piece of hardware, if you really truly need that, evaluate that and say, could aluminum do the job? And if it couldn't, and it has to be a stronger part than that, is titanium the right material? And then try to minimize the size of it. Like if you're talking about a jam nut, these are both thin jam nuts, and they're about the same thickness. I know it doesn't really look like it. The chamfer is way bigger on this than this, but they're pretty close to the same thickness. What if this were a thick jam nut to begin with, like it were double thick like that? Could a half-height jam nut do? And a steel jam nut is very cheap. So just be smart with your choices instead of just saying, oh, hey, I bought this this fancy titanium nut, and that's going to save me so much weight. It's not, okay? The amount of money that you will spend is not going to be a huge gain. But overall, these tiny little gains add up. So if you were thinking, hey, I'm going to buy these because I made this video, and you're like, I want to save a few ounces, great, knock yourself out. But I'm telling you right now that the cost effectiveness of this is not very good at all. So, you know, in the grand scheme of things, think through it. I would say make a spreadsheet, do some accounting, and see what sense it makes before you do that. Think about other things, like a whole car full of gauges, for example. I'll do this because I have it sitting here. That may be a lot heavier when you factor in the mounting, the wires, and everything that goes with it, or versus something like this digital dash, where this Racepak digital dash that replaces everything, in my case, weighs just over 1 pound. So in this case, 1 pound, 0.8 ounces. And this could do everything that all a whole cluster of instruments would do, and it's programmable and so on. Does this look the part? Well, maybe not to you, if we're talking about a kit car or something. For me, I don't really care. So this is what I'm going to use. Not because it weighs 1 pound, but realistically because I already have it. And it eliminates a lot of clutter behind the dash. You know, you have to holistically look at the total weight of every item that you're putting on the car if you're truly going to try to trim weight, especially when you're starting with a fairly lightweight car. There's not any place in the car where you can take out 20 and 30 pounds of weight in most applications, unless we're talking about going from an iron engine block to an aluminum engine block, and the cost of that may be incredibly prohibitive. You would be building that in from scratch. Anyway, so I hope that gives you some idea what it costs you per gram and how much it's worth, and if it's worth it.